So, did the Exodus actually happen? Well, this is what I'm going to suggest to you. The Bible records something about the Exodus, God parting the waters, the people walking through on dry land, all of this rejoicing afterwards, that is really a miraculous story of deliverance. It is a wonderful story of deliverance. It may not be rooted in historical fact, but it has some truth to it. So, the biblical account, this is how I encouraged you to think about the biblical account of the Exodus. It is a reflection of and a transformation of an actual historical event. So I'm going to hold two things in tension right now. Number one, I'm going to say the Exodus as it's recorded in the Bible probably didn't happen exactly that way. Number two, probably historically didn't happen exactly that way. Number two, I'm going to say, but something kind of like it probably did happen. So those two things. So did it happen historically? I don't think so. I don't actually know, but we don't have any evidence that it did. But number two, we've got things that kind of point in the direction that something like that could have happened. So I'm going to walk you through the things that we have that point to something like this could have happened. So the first thing that I want to point out to you that you've read about already in Banstra is this people group called the Hyksos. Now, the Hyksos are a Semitic people group, which means that they're ethnically the same as the Israelites. They're Semitic, just like the Israelites are Semitic, and they immigrate to Egypt's Delta, and they settle there in the 18th century. So a long time ago, even before Moses, right? So they settled there way, way, way back when. And then around 1630, which is also a little bit before Moses, a series of Hyksos kings rule in northern Egypt. So that means that some Semitic people rise to prominence in Egypt and they rule. That story of the Hyksos is kind of similar to our story of Joseph. Remember at the end of Genesis where we've got this Israelite guy who rises to prominence in Egypt and kind of runs the show. So could Joseph have happened? Maybe. I don't know. We have stories that are kind of like that. The next one that I have for you is the story of Sinuhe. And Sinuhe, isn't he cool? I kind of like his Sia hair. It looks like it's dreadlocks cut into kind of a Sia type hairstyle, and he has big old eyes. Anyway, he's from long before Moses too, but it's a story of this Egyptian guy that goes back and forth between Canaan and Egypt multiple times, which indicates to us that these stories of the Israelites going back and forth between Egypt and their homeland during the time of Jacob and Joseph, those could have actually happened. Stuff like this did happen. And then finally, we have the story of the Shasu. Now, the Shasu are also a Semitic people group, and they're from the region of Edom or Moab. And if you go back to your cat and mouse civilization, you'll see that Israel or Edom and Moab are southeast of Israel. And the Shasu, there's an Egyptian inscription that talks about the Shasu, and it says that these Semitic people that were enslaved by the Egyptians, they're referred to as the Shasu of Yahweh. So whoever these Shasu people are, they're Yahweh worshipers, and they were enslaved by the Egyptians. It doesn't line up perfectly. The dating and things like that don't line up perfectly with the Moses narrative, but these are all things that kind of go along with the basic idea of the Moses narrative and the Exodus. So if you're going to ask me, well, did the Exodus actually happen? I'm going to have to say Probably not like it's recorded in the book of Exodus, because remember, I'm looking at the Bible as divine and human along with Steve. Carol is going to say something completely different. She's going to say it happened just as it says it happened. It doesn't matter if we have archaeological evidence or not. So that's an option that's open to you. But Steve is going to say it probably didn't happen exactly like it's recorded in Exodus, but that it was a story that arose to talk about how God delivers people. And it probably has some basis in a real life deliverance that the people of God actually experienced. So whether they were Shasu or Hyksos or whatever they may have been, there's this nugget of God delivered people in such an astonishing way that the best way they could come up with to talk about what had happened was to talk about the sea parting, God reenacting creation and defeating their enemies by letting it all crash down on them, the way that God had done things before. So God moves the waters apart to bless people and allows the waters to come crashing back down onto people to curse them, like Noah and the flood. So you can kind of see the streams of their understanding of the way things work there. Let's see here. What else do I have here? Another a couple of tidbits about this. Sorry that the numbering is so ridiculous, but I've never changed it. Did the Exodus really happen? Well, we've got evidence that Canaanites migrated to Egypt during times of drought. So it could have very well been that some people who were Yahweh worshipers went down to Egypt. We also have evidence that Semitic people were sometimes forced into hard labor, like the Shasu, right? That's hard evidence that we really do have. And then finally, the best evidence, I think, maybe not the best, I'm not sure. In the ancient Near East, it was not cool to define yourselves as people who had been enslaved. So this doesn't sound like something that people would make up. Would you make up a story about being enslaved? No, I don't think so. That would be ridiculous because it's very uncool. And notably, when the people of God are delivered, they don't fight, right? God does all of it. God just parts the waters and lets them come crashing down. And it's the crashing down of the waters that stops the Egyptians. So they're not saying, and we were great warriors and we beat the Egyptians. So yeah, I don't know, kind of a weird thing to make up. Then finally, and this is maybe the best, unleavened bread, which is what the people have to eat as they're leaving Egypt because they leave in such haste, they don't have time to allow the bread to rise. Unleavened bread, if you've ever tried it, if you've ever tried matzah, if you have like a Jewish friend that was like, here, have some matzah right around Passover, try it and tell me what you think of it because it does not taste good. If you are going to make up a story of your origins just wholesale, just out of the blue, you don't associate it with unleavened bread. So these three things kind of point in the direction that something historical happened. We don't exactly know what it is, but the way that the people of God chose to describe it was as God parting the waters so that they could walk through on dry land. I think that got at the heart of what God had done for them. Whatever the deliverance was, whatever they were enslaved to or unfortunately a part of, God delivered them in a big way. And the best way that they could come up with to talk about that was for God to part a sea so that they could walk through and then to allow the sea to come back down on their enemies.